welcome to Conversations with Hannah. Today I am joined by a colleague and good friend of mine, Representative Jeffrey Roy. What are the three? Franklin, Medway, and
just Franklin and Medway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you are in the position of Chair of Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, or TUE, as we call it in the
TUE is much
building.
Easier.
Yes, it is. And I'm really glad that you could be here today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in the legislature on climate policy. Thought I would start, though. We were talking beforehand about local elections. We had our local elections here yesterday and was very pleased to see that John Samia was an incumbent, was reelected, as well as a new member of our Board of Selectmen who was replacing somebody you know well, John LeBeau, who had served for many years, 24 years as a selectman. And
24 years.
Yeah, and
wow.
just stepped down. So Michelle Conlon, who's somebody I worked with closely, got elected yesterday. Was very happy about that. And then on our school committee, we had, again, an incumbent, Lindsay Heffernan, get reelected, which was great. And then a newcomer, Erin Boucher, who's done a ton of work for the schools in different capacities and served with my husband on the Beal Building Committee, our new school in town, get elected. So congratulations to the folks. As you know, it's not always easy to put yourself out there and run for office at any level, and local is as personal as it gets. So,
well, my hat's off to the school committee members. I served 10 years on my school committee in Franklin, and I can tell you that's the toughest job in politics. So God bless them.
It's actually funny. I remember the governor, Charlie Baker, saying at one point that he just had the most tremendous appreciation for anyone who served on school committee, because you were just, there was always an issue that somebody wanted to talk to you about, and
you can never make the right decision.
Yes.
Because every decision you are faced with, there are people on both sides, and it's amazing how I've always observed that nothing drives a parent more than the education of their children, and they will be as passionate and out there to protect their child. So you really have to keep and work hard to do that job.
One of the things I was excited about as well is both boards are now majority women. So was happy to continue as somebody who's always trying to make sure that women feel empowered to run for office, because that's our challenge, is not enough women run. When they run, they win at the same percentage as men. So happy to see, again, more women stepping into these leadership roles at local level and taking on the challenge. So, and then you and I just last week spent a lot of time together as we debated the House budget.
Yes, indeed.
And I thought the process went really well this year. It was much smoother. We didn't have as many late nights. It was a little bit more, sort of 9 o'clock each evening, which for us is not a late night at work.
And not a lot of dead time during the day.
Yeah.
There's activities going on and meetings going on and discussions, and probably one of the best budgets that I've seen in my 10 years there. We really addressed a lot of issues, and I think a lot of people can be happy walking away from that budget.
I agree, and I think certainly the investments in municipalities, starting certainly with the local aid and the education funding, but then a lot of other places where communities can access funding to help support them on the local level. And then, of course, as legislators, we're also always trying to get local earmarks, things that are important projects in the community, and was really happy. And I think actually Franklin has benefited from this. Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services for 3 years had a federal grant to do the youth mental health first aid training for educators and first responders and people who interact with our young people, trying to give them access to services earlier and identifying youth who are at risk of needing them. So Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services actually does that training across the Commonwealth, and we were able to get them some additional money to continue that, which was great. And then Westboro Fire Department had needed some additional equipment cleansing and washing machines, and so we were able to get them some of those things, which again, in the grand scheme of things, it sounds like it's an easy thing, but when you go, with your local town budget and try and find room for some of these things, sometimes it's hard. So it's nice to be able to find some funding on the state level to support these local priorities.
And, having money available to support these local projects. I remember my first few years in the legislature, we faced 9C cuts because there wasn't enough money, and getting a local earmark was extremely difficult, and it was nice that we could do those. One of the things that I was particularly delighted about was the Genocide Education
Yes.
Fund. You know, we passed the Genocide Education Act mandating that
Yep.
all schools teach genocide, but to be able to put some money aside so that it was not an unfunded mandate in kicking in $500,000 for the Genocide Education Trust Fund, that'll give money for each community to do this program in their schools. So.
Yeah, I think there's been some important work the last couple of years around genocide awareness and education on it. Civics,
Sure.
also a really important piece, I think, for our young people coming through the schools and recognizing the role of civics and how, especially you think about people serving in elected and appointed office and the importance of the good political discourse, which many times can mean disagreements, but they're done in a way in which you're working towards, a viable solution instead of just having, disagreements for the sake of disagreements that are going nowhere. And
I constantly use the House of Representatives in Massachusetts as a prime example of orderly discourse and civic discourse. And I say, if you want to see people talking about issues, not always agreeing,
yeah.
but getting to the right point together by working together, come and watch the Massachusetts House of Representatives in action.
Yeah, and climate is actually a great example of that. There's so much work that's done to bills before they come to the floor. That's sort of the last stop. And to some extent, you generally know how it's going to go, but that's not a negative. It's because of all the work that's been done, and sometimes you start from a very different place. But, and the goal isn't to ram something through because you have the votes to do it. The goal is to have, bipartisan supported pieces of legislation that really have come together through the best thinking of multiple voices. And, I tell people all the time, when you say bipartisan too, like sometimes there's vast agreement by, both parties on content, but there's disagreement within the party. So, there could be on the Republican side a disagreement about a piece of legislation within, the same thing for the Democratic side. And yet you can have a core group of both Republicans and Democrats that see the value in something. And so, when you look in Massachusetts, I think one of the things that we've done really well is actually have a lot of those conversations before something is brought to the floor.
Without question. And I think the most recent climate bill that we did, that we voted on as a House on March 3rd of 2022, that started with a conversation with the Speaker about the priorities for doing a piece of legislation, and offshore wind was his ultimate priority. So I did, I call it a tour of the state, visiting universities, visiting companies, visiting folks from the British consulate, everyone I could get my hands on, probably 100 meetings to learn about where Massachusetts had gone with offshore wind and where we think we should go. Meetings with the governor and the lieutenant governor on these topics. It was a great learning experience, and it led to the production of a report. I was a little nervous about handing a 120-page single-spaced report with charts and graphs to the Speaker, but once I turned it in to him, he called me. He said, "This is exactly what I was looking for. Can I make this public?" And I said, "Absolutely. I did it for you." Right. So then that got released to the public, and the public had an idea of what we were looking to do. This is October. And then we worked on a bill, and the bill came out of our committee, the TUE committee, in January. So we reported a bill. Now people had a great idea of what we were going to do. And then for the next 6 weeks, while that bill sat in Ways and Means, there was a lot of back and forth with people who had their opportunity to have meetings and give their feedback and seek tweaks and changes. And the bill that came out of House Ways and Means was somewhat different from what we did at TUE. It was an improved bill.
Like many bills are.
Exactly. Yeah. But it was an improved bill. And then we got the bill onto the floor, and I think one of the things I was delighted at was that we only had 19 amendments to it, because people had an opportunity.
Right.
And I heard people speaking from the floor saying they appreciated the opportunity to be heard and talk about issues that were important and to see them incorporated in the final product. And that's really how a bill ought to hit the floor. And, we had a bit of a debate, and by the end of the day, we had a vote. I think there were only 12 people in the negative.
144 to I think there was only 12.
Only 12 in the negative, and the majority there was only one Democrat who voted no, and it was 11 Republicans who voted no. So the majority of both parties supported this bill because they had input into the development of the bill.
Well, and to your point, I mean, in my time being in the legislature since 2015, we've done numerous bills around climate. Some of them are broader sort of funding vehicles to think about, how do we pay for some of these things. Some of them are more philosophical, coming up with like, what's our roadmap? What are we going to cement ourselves to in order to meet these targets? And then some are much more going deep down into the implementation piece of it. And so we had done a bill just a year before, which had we'd voted on several times in the legislature in one session.
We had two different chairs involved in that bill, getting it to the governor's desk. I think it was either 3 or 4 times on the governor's desk. And
then we finally got signed into law in March of 2021.
Right.
And that really laid out, our commitment as a Commonwealth. I think we called it like the roadmap sort of.
Roadmap bill, right.
Explain a little bit about what that bill did.
So what that bill did was set goals for us to get to net zero by 2050. So every 5 years, the administration would have to come up with a plan as to how they were going to reduce carbon emissions to the point where we had no carbon emissions by 2050. So that's 28 years we were looking out. And so there's a 2025 plan, a 2030 plan, 2035, and so on and so forth. And we have to reduce carbon emissions every 5 years to the point where we'll have net zero by 2050. And within that bill was to also define, and this was the real sticking point at the end of the day, is defining what a net zero building is and what types of building performance standards that folks who are in the construction trade, what the expectation was for a building. And so we asked the administration to come up with an opt-in specialized stretch energy code, gave them 18 months. So we got the first look at it back in March of 2022, and by December 2022, there'll be a new building code out there to help folks determine what they need to do in the construction moving forward.
And I think as part of that too, we also looked at different sectors and had some guidance and some certain milestones to meet in that, I think, which is helpful. And because there are, several areas in which the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions come from, and so you can't really set a target without also sort of specifying, where and when you need to hit certain things in order to get to that final target.
And those were the sublimits that we set, transportation, buildings, and say, look at those individual sectors. And one of the sticking points in the final negotiations was, well, if we do not do well with one sector, but we do very well with another sector, can't we just add them together so as long as we reach our goal, we don't have to do it with every particular sublimit? And I thought that was a reasonable way to get, and that's where the legislation ended up.
And certainly, I mean, everyone in Shrewsbury knows that the first Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs is Matt Beaton, who is former rep in the seat that I now sit, and a very close friend of both of ours.
Sure.
And then we had, when he left to go back to the private sector, we call her Climate Katie, but Secretary Katie Theoharides, and she just announced she's leaving, which is this is sort of what happens in the end of a second term or, a final term for an administration. And she's done a great job, I think,
Fantastic
being
job.
Just always an open, willing partner to listen, to talk to. I've dealt with her more on the food security side of things, especially through the pandemic with all the work that we're doing. But I know that, I've always heard just very positive remarks for, going at this in a joint way. And
she was a steady partner from the very beginning. I became the chair of this committee in February 2022, and one of my first meetings was with Climate Katie, and we became very close, did a lot together, and the offshore wind, I think we shared a passion, and we shared a desire to make Massachusetts the go-to state for offshore wind in the country. And we've already set goals of 5,600 megawatts of offshore wind energy, and we know we're going to keep increasing that goal. And very proud to say that Massachusetts is the first state to break ground to have a large-scale offshore wind farm, and that is Vineyard Wind, which is under construction right now. Those turbines will be producing energy probably the end of 2023, 2024. We have Mayflower Wind right in behind them to develop a new project right after. So the President Biden, has set a goal of 30 gigawatts, which is 30,000 megawatts. Massachusetts is well positioned and poised to provide 1/3 of the national goal by 2030, 2035. We will be right there producing energy. And I think your viewers should know that off the coast of Martha's Vineyard is the most robust wind in the contiguous United States. And this is an opportunity for Massachusetts to gain energy independence. For so long, we've been relying on imported natural gas coming from pipelines up from Pennsylvania. This will be probably the first opportunity for us to manufacture our own energy, and we need to take advantage of this great natural resource that we have.
And we have been, again, as a state, we've led on these issues in terms of the moving to clean energy and renewable energy, but we've also been challenged because the governor, the bill we did a couple years ago, the hydroelectric, and trying to bring that down through. Again, we can't do that independently.
Right.
We require other states to be able to have the lines come down through, and certainly people probably know how challenging that has been. And so this is, again, to your point, something where we're able to do this as a state, and we're not going to have any other state saying, oh no, you can't do that. You can't get the renewable energy you want because we don't want the transmission lines going through this. Again, understood, their state, their perspective. But I think as we move forward, having it be something that is more dependent in our own area and not having to think through the complexities of other relationships, I think is helpful. And you mentioned the offshore wind bill that we just did. And so one might think the path to that is becoming signed into law, but we have Senate partners.
Yes, we do.
And so, whatever bill goes through us has to go through them and vice versa. The Senate took a different tact a little bit. They've done their own bill. There are some prime differences between ours and theirs, which I know you're going to be leading a conference committee soon, but what sort of are the greatest differences at this moment that we have to work out between the chambers before we could deliver something to the governor?
So we took a somewhat different approach on offshore wind. I think the House was far more aggressive, viewing offshore wind as an opportunity for us to create a new industry. And that's something that we'll attempt to work at the conference committee to get the Senate to adopt a more aggressive approach. In terms of grid modernization, so to get all of this to work, we need to upgrade our grid in Massachusetts. It was built for a much different source of energy, working in one way, so that the power is generated at a plant and pushed into people's homes. We need to move that energy back and forth. And so to do that, we need to modernize the grid. So we did a major piece of grid modernization language in our bill. The Senate did not adopt that. Transmission planning is another piece. How do you transmit energy, for example, from these wind turbines that we're going to have off the coast? We have just so much transmission capacity in Massachusetts, we need to address that. And that's probably something we're going to have to do on a regional approach with other states. So those are major components that we had that the Senate didn't have. So the Senate, on the other hand, did a lot on electric vehicles. They want to bolster the electric vehicle industry. I'm supportive of that. I've been driving an electric vehicle since 2012, so for 10 years, I get it. And it's a way to lower transportation emissions. So we'll be talking about that. They did some more work with buildings and how they're going to make restrictions on new building construction. We're going to have conversations about that because we did not take that approach. But, you know, they're different bills. But that's the nature of the beast. Our job as a conference committee will be to bring these two bills together to produce one massive bill that both bodies will support. I will say, in the House, we got a majority of Republican support for our bill. In the Senate, they got no Republican support for their bill.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, and actually there's an article in the Globe, I'm sure you saw it this morning, that's speaking to one of the things in the Senate bill is that it would allow certain communities to not have any additional gas hookups. And one of the articles this morning in the Globe was talking about how that could be a real problem for the life sciences industry, who has enormous energy needs that can't all be met by other forms of energy at this point. And so and some of the towns that are looking to do this are in areas where there is a robust life sciences growth. And so those are some of the things when, again, philosophically, you might all agree on where we want to go, but there are real issues that, you know, have economic impacts that you also have to think through. And, you know, I've always said, as we're attempting to get where we all want to go, you know, the heart of the discourse that occurs is in your belief on how best to get there and what the timing mechanism is. And so, you know, again, I think everyone, you know, that I talk to, our colleagues, inherently understands why, for the benefit of the climate, we need to go where we're going to go. But a lot of the discourse that we have and those conversations and that work that you do leading to a bill coming to the floor is, you know, is something that we want to do. Is it realistic? And if we take this tack, like, what are the things that are the byproducts that are going to happen? And can we live with those? Or do they then have unintended consequences of? So I think, you know, conference committees, there are 3 people from the House, 3 people from the Senate, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican on each side. And, you know, you have a lot on your shoulders because you're sort of, you're carrying your chamber's desires. You're carrying the Speaker or the Senate President sort of, you know, positions on things. And yet to not come to agreement means none of this happens.
And that would be a shame. And, you know, we're doing this work in the context of Russia attacked Ukraine. And one of the issues that arises in that dispute is the threat towards natural gas.
Right.
And you can see how one country can shut off the flow of energy. That cries out for energy independence.
Right.
And that's work that we need to do. The IPCC from the United Nations has issued climate reports over the last several weeks saying that we are very deep into a climate crisis. There's still time for us to take action, but there's not much left.
Right.
So there's a sense of urgency for us to do something. So not only do we take both branches to the table in the conference committee and what each of those branches do, but we are taking climate change as an activity that's going on in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and have an opportunity to do something to stop the global warming that's taking place. You know, one of the conversations I have consistently is with fishermen. And, you know, saying, you know, are these turbines going to interfere with our fishing operations? I say to them, the warming waters have had much more to do with a loss in the fishing industry. For example, the lobster industry has lost 75% of their lobsters. They've gone to the Gulf of Maine because the waters are much cooler there. And,
being a Maine girl, I do know that.
Well, so
yeah.
So I say, to the extent that we can stop the warming waters, we're going to do so much more for the fishing industry than anything else. And I try to appeal to their sense of climate change has that type of an impact on their industry. It has an impact on rising sea levels. It has an impact on the weather and the climate that we're undertaking. I don't know if you've noticed over the couple of years, we go right from winter to summer. There's really no spring built in. So.
Well, and food insecurity, which is an area I spend a lot of time on, certainly in the Southern Hemisphere. One of the things that has driven a lot of people attempting to migrate away from where they live is the fact that the climate has changed their ability to grow crops to such an extent they no longer can. And so now they're seeking other food opportunities. And so all of these things are certainly interconnected, the economic piece, people's decisions about where they can live in the world. And I think that, to your point, when we're in these conference committees, it is a give and a take, right? Like you're no side wins, theoretically. You come out with a bill that's better than the other two went into it. And it's also, there's a clock ticking. We are only in formal sessions through the end of July, and this would certainly be a bill that would need a vote in a formal session. And you also have the governor can veto elements of something, so you want to have enough time built in that and sometimes the governor sends back recommendations we've actually adopted. There have been instances of that as well, but you need to have a significant period of time whereby your committee gets the work done, and then we can run the clock out with making sure that there is a bill that gets adopted before we close out our formal sessions. And so if you don't, the hard thing is you don't then start in the new session from where you leave off. You start from zero again.
Right.
And, your report will still be there and you'll have something to build with. But, every time you do that, what you're then putting off is additional work. And I know you and I have already talked about sort of what you're thinking about the next bill is that we should be doing. And so if we don't get this one done, you can't start thinking about that next one. So you have a lot of work ahead of you. I really appreciate all the work that you do. And I think, my goal through some of these conversations is always for people, who are back home and not seeing the in and out of every day of the work that we do, just understanding that there are really good people doing a lot of good work, and that compromise is the way that we look at advancing bills, and that, all of us, I think, are committed to the work that we need to do relative to the climate. And it's something that we will every session be working on. I can't imagine a session we're not.
No, we'll do one every session. And I do want to emphasize and thank you for being such a great partner in this work, because the ability to have, even an exchange like we're having today, so that people know what type of work we're doing, but your contributions on the House floor, your emails, your conversations that we have about the components of this bill are so important. And I don't think people have a realization that these conversations do take place, and we do work together very well. And I want to thank you for everything you have done to make that bill what it is. And
I appreciate that, my friend. Thank you. And I appreciate the fact that you're also an individual who has many other talents, including you ride for charity and your bike. I think you've done the PMC.
This is my 20th year.
Crazy. I can't even bike a mile. But thank you for that work, your charity work as well. It's really incredible. And
thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Conversations with Hannah. Look forward to seeing you next time.